A commercial flight carrying 270 passengers was cruising at 30,000 feet when a sudden jolt shook the cabin violently, immediately followed by the acrid smell of smoke that spread through the aisles like wildfire. Panic erupted as passengers screamed, clutched at their seats, and searched desperately for oxygen masks that had fallen loosely from the overhead compartments. The lights flickered, and the cabin temperature began to rise as the fire, originating somewhere in the rear cargo hold, crept rapidly through the fuselage. Flight attendants moved frantically, shouting instructions to terrified passengers while struggling to keep a semblance of order in a situation that seemed utterly uncontrollable. Amid this chaos, a young pilot, barely in her mid-20s but trained in advanced simulators and emergency procedures, gripped the controls with a calm that belied the catastrophic circumstances. Her heart pounded, yet she forced herself to take deep, steadying breaths, knowing that any hint of panic could ripple through the cockpit and the plane alike. Reaching for the radio, she began communicating with air traffic control, her voice firm but measured, explaining the nature of the fire, the sudden loss of cabin pressure, and the possible structural dangers looming. The controllers in the ground, recognizing the severity of the situation, immediately mobilized every available emergency response, coordinating with nearby military aircraft and sending directives to the nearest airports to prepare emergency landings. Despite the terror filling the cabin, the young pilot relied on her training, recalling countless hours spent in simulators designed for every imaginable crisis, from engine failures to complete electrical outages. She manipulated the controls with precision, balancing the aircraft's pitch and altitude to keep the plane stable while minimizing stress on the already compromised fuselage. Smoke billowed thicker, and visibility through the cockpit windows became murky, but she remained focused, periodically checking instruments that warned of rising temperatures in multiple sections of the aircraft. She knew that if the fire reached the fuel tanks or weakened the wings, the consequences would be catastrophic. Meanwhile, passengers clutched at each other, some praying silently, others screamed for reassurance that wasn't immediately coming. Flight attendants moved like warriors in a storm, handing out oxygen masks, helping terrified children, and doing their best to maintain order as the cabin filled with heat and smoke. Outside, the horizon was a blur of clouds, and the altitude made every decision critical. One wrong maneuver could destabilize the plane sending it into an uncontrollable spin. The young pilot, sensing the growing urgency, decided to initiate a controlled descent, calculating each degree of pitch and rate of descent with meticulous care. As she guided the plane downward, she constantly monitored the engines, listening for unusual sounds that could signal imminent failure. Her mind raced with contingency plans, calculating alternate runways, emergency landing strips, and the timing of emergency services arrival. She was acutely aware that every second counted and that the lives of 270 innocent people hung entirely on her decisions. Through the cockpit's haze, she could barely make out the silhouettes of passengers through the windows, their fear mirrored in their wide eyes, faces smeared with soot, and hands trembling uncontrollably. In this moment, all her prior doubts about her abilities were pushed aside. Training, instinct, and sheer determination became her only guides. Coordinating with air traffic control, she received constant updates on wind patterns, emergency vehicles readying on the ground, and the approach paths that would allow her to land safely despite the damage. She instructed the cabin crew to secure the passengers as best as they could, reassuring them in brief but firm tones that help was coming, and that they needed to remain calm to maximize their chances of survival. The fire continued to spread in the rear, sending plumes of black smoke curling into the cabin vents. Yet she stayed composed, adjusting the plane's speed and altitude to reduce turbulence that could fan the flames or compromise the structural integrity. Every instrument in the cockpit was her lifeline. The altimeter, airspeed indicator, fire detection systems, and engine gauges, all critical to making split-second decisions under extreme pressure. She even began mentally rehearsing evacuation procedures, knowing that a safe landing would only be part of the ordeal. Ensuring an orderly evacuation under panic was another monumental challenge. The passengers' cries and coughing filled the cabin, a stark reminder of the sigh. Takes, but she drew on an inner calm, one honed through countless simulations, imagining each step of the emergency landing as if she had already performed it flawlessly. Gradually, the aircraft began its descent toward the designated airport, a jagged strip of tarmac prepared for the worst, but hoped for the best. The young pilot adjusted flaps and throttle with exact precision, coaxing the plane toward stability, while constantly recalculating distance, wind shear, and the burning sections of the fuselage. She could hear the faint whine of engines under stress, smell the smoke even in the cockpit, and feel the subtle tremors of the airframe as it responded to her careful maneuvers. In the cabin, oxygen masks were used, children were clutched tightly, and passengers began to grasp that survival was no longer a distant hope, but a tangible possibility, anchored entirely in the skill and composure of the pilot at the controls. Every passing minute felt both fleeting and eternal, the delicate balance between disaster and salvation hanging by the finest thread. Outside, the clouds seemed indifferent to the human struggle below, yet she pressed forward, relying not on luck but on training, calculation, and determination to guide the aircraft safely toward the ground. As each mile descended, the fire's threat remained imminent, yet the hope of landing grew stronger. The young pilot kept her focus razor-sharp, eyes darting between the instruments and the horizon, hands steady, mind alert, as the realization dawned that she had become the lifeline for 270 people, each heartbeat dependent on her courage and composure in the face of unimaginable danger. As the situation continued to deteriorate, the smoke thickening and flames licking higher along the fuselage, the young pilot realized she would need more than her own training to bring the aircraft safely down. The fire was spreading faster than anticipated, and the strain on the plane's engines was becoming critical. Through the haze and heat of the cockpit, she kept her focus razor-sharp, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. It was then that the distant roar of fighter jets reached her ears, the unmistakable, high-pitched whine of F-22 Raptors cutting through the sky like metallic arrows. The sudden appearance of these advanced military aircraft brought a glimmer of hope, yet she had no idea if they had identified her plight or could intervene directly. She keyed the radio, her voice steady but urgent, stating her call sign and outlining the escalating emergency. Almost immediately, the response came, a crisp, professional acknowledgement that she was now being tracked and that support was on its way. The F-22 pilots, experienced in both combat and high-stakes rescue operations, quickly assessed the situation through visual confirmation and radar, noting the smoke trailing behind the commercial airliner and the irregular flight path that indicated structural stress. Their presence alone provided a psychological boost to the young pilot, whose mind had been running through countless worst-case scenarios in the previous minutes. She followed their verbal instructions closely, each command precise, guiding her through a series of emergency maneuvers designed to reduce drag, stabilize altitude, and minimize the spread of flames while keeping the plane under her control. The fighter jets flanked the airliner, maintaining a delicate formation that allowed the military pilots to monitor the fire's progression and communicate continuously with her, offering technical guidance for every adjustment. The young pilot adjusted flaps, throttles, and rudders with meticulous care, performing maneuvers she had only practiced in simulators, but now under the real and terrifying. Diaz whipped past the cockpit windows, a blur of white and grey. But inside, her focus was laser-sharp, every instrument readout scrutinized, every vibration and shudder analyzed to anticipate the plane's response. The fighter pilot's calm, authoritative, pressure of hundreds of lives depending on her skill. Outside, the cloud. A guidance gave her the clarity to make quick decisions, adjusting her descent rate and angle of approach to accommodate the structural damage that had begun to compromise the aircraft's stability. They instructed her on how to use engine thrust asymmetrically to counterbalance the fuselage, large strain, a technique that required both precision and nerves of steel, and she executed it flawlessly, feeling the subtle shifts in the plane's weight and balance. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers remained tense but gradually responsive to the crew's directions, their fear tempered slightly by the knowledge that trained professionals were actively coordinating their rescue from above. Flight attendants worked tirelessly, assisting children and elderly passengers, distributing oxygen masks, and repeating the pilot's calm reassurances over the intercom. The young pilot's voice, steady and authoritative despite the chaos, became an anchor for the entire cabin, her composure amplified by the support of the F-22 pilots guiding her through each critical step. As the plane approached the airport, the pilots on the ground and the military jets in formation continuously updated her on wind conditions, runway, approach angles, and emergency personnel positioning, allowing her to make precise incremental adjustments to speed, altitude, and descent rate. Each maneuver was fraught with risk. A slight miscalculation could exacerbate the fire, strain the already weakened fuselage, or destabilize the aircraft entirely. Yet she continued, heart racing, mind clear, following every instruction with unwavering focus. The fighter jets mirrored her movements, giving visual cues, signaling when to bank slightly, when to reduce thrust, and when to prepare for final landing adjustments. In the cockpit, smoke artillery obscured the instruments, but she trusted both her training and the expert eyes of the F-22 pilots, who had the benefit of superior vantage and technology to detect potential hazards. She relied on their steady, precise voice commands like a lifeline, coordinating each shift of the throttle, each minor pitch correction, and each rudder adjustment with mechanical precision, her hands steady despite the searing heat and acrid smoke. As they neared the runway, the fire's intensity seemed to peak, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky, but the fighter pilots guided her into a perfect glide path, reducing speed incrementally while maintaining lift and control over the ailing aircraft. She could feel the strain on the landing gear, the subtle tremors, as the plane adjusted to flaps and wind resistance, but the guidance she received allowed her to keep every variable within survivable limits. Outside, emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing, fire suppression crews ready, and paramedics stationed strategically. All preparations were synchronized with the instructions coming from the F-22 pilots above. The young pilot executed the final approach, her focus singular, the knowledge that 270 lives depended entirely on her reinforcing key. To action she took. She guided the plane downward with incremental precision, keeping the nose slightly elevated to reduce stress on the landing gear while maintaining enough speed to avoid stalling. The first touch of wheels on the tarmac sent a jolt through the cabin, but her hands remained firm on the controls, adjusting for the plane's slight veer caused by uneven weight distribution from the cargo hold fire. With guidance from the F-22 pilots, she engaged reverse thrust and maintained directional control until the plane came to a complete stop, A cheer erupted from passengers and crew alike, relief washing over the cabin, tears mingling with soot-streaked faces as they realized they had survived what seemed an impossible ordeal. The fighter jets circled briefly, ensuring that the aircraft remained stable and that no further risk existed before returning to base, their presence a testament to the coordination and expertise that had made the rescue possible. Emergency crews swarmed the plane immediately, extinguishing residual flames and assisting passengers off the aircraft, all alive, thanks to the courage, skill, and calm determination of a young pilot who refused to surrender to panic. Guy, led at every step by the precise instructions and unwavering support of the F-22 pilots. What had begun as a terrifying nightmare at 30,000 feet ended in miraculous survival, a testament to human skill, bravery, and the extraordinary impact of teamwork under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The young pilot, though exhausted and shaken, felt an overwhelming sense of relief and accomplishment, knowing that her focus and the expert guidance she had received from the skies above had saved 270 lives from what could easily have been a catastrophic disaster.